morning. I'm Nick, for those of you that don't know who I am. I am married to the beautiful Renee, the one that does most of your social media content and your newsletters. We're the ones that raise the delicious meat that you guys so graciously purchase from us. And I'm going to do something a little different here. I'm going to take you guys and show you a part of agriculture that does not involve cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, or goats. I'm going to show you guys the forestry side of what we do as well. We're going to be doing some logging this spring. Now, logging has a big misconception on what that actually is. We're not going in and we're not clearing out all the trees. We're going in and we're select harvesting trees. We work with a forester. He has a forest management plan, and every so often we go in, we pull out good trees, bad trees, to make room for new growth, better growth, better forest health. And I'm going to have him explain that to you when we get there. But we are on our way there to the woods that he is working in right now. What he does is he's sizing up certain trees and choosing which ones will be included in the sale. And I'll have him explain what he does for us. We've been working with him for a long time now. He is a neighbor, family friend, and soon to be my nephew's father-in-law. So it's kind of neat to be able to work with somebody like this. He is extremely knowledgeable and one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. So I will take you there, so stay tuned and we will try and teach you something new. Alright, so we are pulling into one of our woods right now. Sorry if this is a little shaky. Springtime Michigan roads. It's our roads are not very smooth. So if this gets a little shaky, I'm sorry. And the trail I'm turning down is not the best either. So let's see if I can figure out how to turn this camera around. Alright, so here we are pulling into the trail that leads deep into the heart of one of these woods that we are logging this year. See, there's a lot of water. All the snow is pretty much melted out of here. It's the 2nd of March, and we're looking at a high of 50 degrees today. But we'll try and do our best to not get stuck, and we'll see if we can locate him, because this is a rather large-sized piece of property, and there is no self-service back here. So we might have to do a lot of wandering before we catch up with old Mr. Jeff. This was logged about 8 years ago. We took out what was known as a lot of pallet wood then. It is trees that were overgrown, dying. We had a disease come through known as the emerald ash borer, which is took all the ash trees out. So we took a lot of those out and made them into pallets, or sold them to a pallet company that made them into pallets. So see how far we can make it here without getting stuck, till we got to get out and walk. So I was able to find him, the man, the myth, the legend.
Hello.
Mr. Jeff Steinkraus, who is our forester. So, Jeff, what do you do?
So as a consulting forester, I have a degree in forest management, and the consulting part of it is I work for private landowners mostly and help them manage their woodlots.
Okay. What is managing their woodlots?
So depending on the person that owns it, some people manage it more for income, for timber products, and periodically sell trees out of their woods to get income, help pay the property taxes. Other people manage it more for wildlife. They're trying to make it a little more open for deer, especially. That seems to be their most popular management. And in the maple woods like this, where you see zero understory, opening up a canopy will allow some of this younger vegetation to come up, which is more comforting for the deer. There's more to eat. They can eat the leaves off of these smaller shrubs and plants. Whereas if you go up into the maple woods, there's very little to eat at this point.
Now, we logged this about 8 years ago.
Right.
What happened to all the tops, everything that got logged, because it's open?
They have pretty well disintegrated. Maple, even though it's a really hard wood, when it's cut and milled as green, when it hits the ground and starts to decay, it decays rather rapidly. And that decay process actually recycles the top into the next generation of trees. So it's renewing the soil and does provide cover, does provide some habitat in the meantime, and then it recycles. And some people use it for firewood, but otherwise it just rots and decays back into the ground.
Well, what kind of tools do you got with you?
So I have a measuring stick. This stick is called the Biltmore Stick. You hold it 25 inches from your eye. With one eye closed, you line up the edge of the stick with the edge of the tree, and then you read the number on this side. It's already calibrated to read the diameter. So it's a lot quicker to do that. That's a 20-inch tree. Then to take this diameter tape and wrap it all the way around. And it says 18.8 or 19.8, so I was pretty close.
Perfect. So
the object of that measuring is to we have volume tables. So I'll measure the diameter. I'll estimate the number of 6-foot logs. Not that anybody cuts a 6-foot log, but 12-foot logs are pretty common. So in other words, it's a half log to the nearest half log. And then I entered that into my computer, and then it'll print me out a volume table saying how many of which species. This is a red maple. How many red maple there are and what the estimated board feet is. That gives the loggers that are going to be bidding on this, or timber companies, an idea of what's here before they even come out and look at it. And some use the numbers right off the sheet and they don't even come out and look at it. Most of them at least take a walk through the woods.
Sure.
It saves them time from having to measure every single tree.
So why was this tree marked?
So if you look at the top, it had some storm damage at some point in the past. Plus the form of the tree is not very good and never will be. So this is kind of like weeding the garden. We have a nice sugar maple right here, a nice sugar maple there. So by taking this one out, it'll let those trees grow.
Okay.
Trees don't live forever, so when they're damaged, especially like this, that accelerates their decline. The tulip tree over there was marked because of the lean. It was partially uprooted, probably the same time this top came out. So anticipating that one's probably going to blow over before too much longer prevents it from rotting and losing all the value out of that tree.
And taking down good trees with it.
Right. So loggers generally can directionally fell the trees and avoid a lot of injury to other trees. Whereas if it just falls on its own, just depends on which way the wind's blowing and how much damage it's going to do. So.
Yep. Now, how long have you been doing this?
I've done this since 1993.
And you got a degree in?
Forest management from Michigan Tech.
Michigan Tech.
Worked a couple years for a power company after I graduated, marking trees to trim along the power lines. But this is much more enjoyable. Be out in the woods and enjoying nature.
Yep.
Working with landowners, helping them achieve their goals. So in a typical woods, we would come in every 8 to 10 years and do a harvest. It could be quicker if there's a storm, but otherwise doing a periodic harvest allows the canopy to open. When you have this younger regeneration here, that's the next crop of trees, and typically we don't have to replant anything. It's usually we're able to use the seeds that are already here to regenerate them. So.
Is there a better time to log, as far as weather?
So winter is nice when the ground is frozen, but not every year does it freeze. And if you get the snow layer, typically the ground under it doesn't freeze. This is spring of the year when the frost is coming out of the ground is the worst time. And the bark is also looser, so if it's a really tight woods, a lot of trees, then sometimes dragging the trees next to another one could skin up the bark. Whereas other times of the year, midwinter, it's usually pretty tight, so it doesn't do as much damage, if any.
So marking these today, the beginning of March, these will not be cut for roughly how long?
Just because most companies have a backlog of a couple months, it'll probably be summer or fall even before, or even possibly next winter before they would cut it.
Especially with us putting a crop out in this field, they don't want to come in and log this and not be able to get to them.
Right.
All right. Well, let's see if we can't find another tree to mark, and I can kind of show them the process of finding a tree and see where we're at.
There's a good candidate. So that one is an American elm. So some people like to leave the elms for the mushrooms. Let's let them die naturally. Usually the first year after the elm tree dies is a good mushroom crop. If you didn't like mushrooms, you never came out and hunted them, then taking that tree out before it dies from the Dutch elm disease would be a good choice. And that would allow the maples to have a little more room to grow.
So the Dutch elm disease, I kind of explained the emerald ash borer that took out all the ash. What is the Dutch elm disease?
So the Dutch elm disease is a combination of a bark beetle and a fungus. And it first came in around the 1960s. Several streets were lined with elm trees and made a nice canopy. I believe it came over from Europe, this disease, and it's persisted since then. Sometimes trees die 3 or 4 inches in diameter, and sometimes they get up to 26 inches in diameter, something like that. So they can become a full-size mature tree sometimes, but you never know when it's going to hit. It could look perfectly fine in the spring, and then somewhere around July, if that beetle gets in there with that fungus, it'll kill it that same year. So it just dies instantly. Most diseases, at least you have a few years to work with it, or try and, like when the ash died, that was a slower process. You could generally salvage those. If the Dutch elm disease comes into a tree, and if it's only one tree, then it's not going to be worth salvaging that tree typically. And usually it's not the full woods that's going to die out at once either. So
now, is this disease going to do like it did with the ash and take all the ash out eventually, or all the elm out, or is it that slow?
So it's slow enough that even all the elm in one woods typically won't die. But if there are some dead ones, typically you know that bark beetle's going to be able to pick up the spores and transfer that fungus to another tree. So it's more likely that they're going to die if it's already in the woods than if there's none in the woods. Or if it's only a couple trees in the woods, then the likelihood of that bark beetle finding the fungus and bringing it in is not real strong.
Okay. So now the bark is starting to peel on this tree at the base. Would you say that this is a candidate for that, or something else?
That was probably an injury from a tree falling.
Okay.
So So the bark beetle just makes a real small hole up in the twigs of the tree, so
Okay.
it's not even down at this level. And then it spreads. It's like a vascular, kind of like hardening of the arteries, is if you want to compare it to human terms, where it stops the flow of everything, and that fungus just plugs up all the vessels. So that's why it turns brown in midsummer when everything else is still nice and green.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see how you do it.
So do you want to keep yelling for the mushroom?
So, when we logged this about 8 years ago, I actually found more mushrooms around the base of the stump than around the tree when it was still standing.
So that would be a yes. We'll take the tree and we'll collect the mushrooms.
I love mushrooms.
So in the back of my mind, whenever I'm marking the woods, I'm thinking of the conversations we've had with the landowners, and that makes a decision on how long we're going to grow these trees. Let's say the next harvest is going to be in 8 more years. This one's likely going to be dead before that because of this injury and because it's an elm. So that would be a good candidate. So measuring that tree, 17 inches there, 16 inches. So even though we ideally would like to grow the tree up to 18 inches on a lot of species or bigger, this one's not going to improve any in quality. So that's really not a factor. So the health risk is the main reason I'm picking this one. So I mark the trees so when so there's going to be a timber buyer that's going to come and look at it first, and then there's going to be a logger that'll come out. So they want to know which ones they're bidding on, and the loggers need to know which ones they can cut.
So after you mark it, you come back to your computer, and then you inventory the diameter of the tree, and then estimate the height for the board foot.
Right.
And then that goes all back into a system that generates at the end how many species of each tree are marked and how many board feet are here, essentially.
That's correct. Yep.
And that's what, when you open the bidding up, because you'll get multiple bids for it.
Right. We always recommend selling them standing. I've had a few people try to do their own logging and sell the logs, and it generally doesn't work well. And then you're also stuck. You have to take whatever price you can get. Whereas if we put this up for bid and we just don't get a very good bid, we can wait and try it again. We'll figure out why we didn't get a very good bid. But I'll have a pretty good estimate on how much value the high bidder will likely be. And we invite reputable companies to bid on the trees. The ones that are of poor reputation, I don't want to deal with having trees come up missing or extra trees taken. I'd just rather deal with reputable companies, and there's still plenty of good companies out there.
And trees,
checking on them periodically is helpful too.
Right. So marking the tree, you put the marks up high to mark which tree is being taken so the loggers can see it clearly. But then you also put a mark on the roots or the stump. And that's to verify that tree was marked and included in the sale?
Correct. So if they cut that tree, for instance, without any stump mark, you wouldn't know once the tree's gone if it was marked or not. So it's just you could have an argument saying, I'm sure that tree was marked. At least this way we got a little bit of a accountability. We can say, yep, that one was marked.
Sure.
Sometimes this paint gets scraped off and whatever, but usually at least there's a little bit of a splatter around there somewhere. Doesn't mean somebody couldn't bring their own blue paint and mark the stump. However, typically it ages at the same rate, more or less. So if somebody put a fresh mark after 6 months, it's going to look a lot different than if it's marked right now and same as the other spot.
How long will this paint stay on, like these dots up top?
This is a bark mark paint, so it sticks on the outer edge. It's made specifically for marking trees, and it'll last. Well, we found a couple of beech trees that were marked 8 years ago that still had some blue paint on them they didn't take last time. So I remarked them.
Right.
So those are money trees. You get to sell them more than once.
So what is the purpose? Why would they have not taken that tree then?
So that was a beech, and beech is low value, and if they don't even have a good market for the beech, then sometimes it costs them more just to haul it than it is to just leave leave it in the woods. Now, for your purposes, getting them out of the woods is usually beneficial because we want to regenerate, and those beeches are just taking up a lot of space, a lot of shade. Nothing can grow underneath them, so we'd want them out. The loggers have the right not to take anything they don't want to. So, but by doing it competitively, typically they're paying enough that they usually cut just about everything that we mark, except maybe some of the cull trees, which we'll put an X on. Cull tree would be something that's maybe 3/4 of the way hollow and might be a couple limbs that might have some usable timber in it, but we don't want to advertise it per se as a good tree when it's marginal at best.
Sure.
But it's also one that if they're going to pick a direction to put a tree and they see one with an X, then they can aim for that tree and not do damage to 3 other sides where we might have better trees. So that's another purpose why we mark the X trees.
So with being out in the woods year round, what's one of the craziest things you've seen in the woods before?
We were out doing some grapevine cutting one day, and a raccoon, middle of the day, comes walking right at me. I'm like, what? How long is that thing going to keep coming? It came within 2 feet of me and then finally steered away. But that was probably one of the most interesting encounters with a raccoon. And then in another tree had a hollow spot in it. This was different woods, different time. And there's a little owl in there looking at me. I kind of felt like I was being watched, and I just looked in that tree and it's like, whoa, I'm being watched.
Nice.
I get to see a lot of deer, squirrels in their normal habitat, doing normal things, but those were a couple of the most unique ones.
And with taking these down, so this tree, for instance, they're going to leave the top. Yeah. So you're not just, a squirrel might live in the top of this tree, but with leaving the top, you're going to create more habitat for other animals as well, because a squirrel can move to the tree next to it. Right. They pack their bags pretty quick, I guess.
They do. Sometimes they ride the tree down when it's being cut, when they run off and they find another tree. Most of the time they survive the tree falling even. Flying squirrels especially, you can see them gliding out of the tree sometimes when it's being harvested. Raccoons sometimes are inside the cavity of a tree, and sometimes they get shaken up a little bit. But a lot of times they even survive.
It's crazy how much animals can withstand and walk away when, if we were to ride that tree down, it wouldn't, yes, it would not end too well. Well, we're going to let you get back at it. I appreciate all your knowledge and letting us interview you and show our customers another side of something that they don't get to see or have the knowledge of.
Sure, my pleasure.
All right, well, we'll get on our way.